It's a pleasure to be able to introduce a lady who is distinguished in her own right and who has done a tremendous job. She's the founder and organizer of Doorstep Savannah, which is a conservative educational movement. She herself is a college graduate of considerable distinction. She comes from a most interesting family. Her father is responsible for the Library of Business and Economics at the Harvard Business School, and that was what really got her started on many of these matters. And she could speak the whole evening, I know, with great authority, but we are confining her activities to acting as moderator for the first part of this program. And contrary to the program, she is not known as C. Wesley Frame. That's her husband's name. She is Rosalind Frame, or Mrs. C. Wesley Frame, and it's a great pleasure to present her to you now.
Thank you so much, Colonel Bunker. I would like to add that my father founded this particular Library of Business and Economics back in the days when Harvard was a pretty reliable college, not a liberal college. My father was a great conservative, so I must say that to his memory. The topic of our speaker tonight is the challenge of our times. And Mr. Walter Matt, the gentleman on my right here, comes from St. Paul, Minnesota. He attended Catholic schools, St. Thomas Military Academy, and St. Thomas College. His grandfather founded the Wanderer in 1867. In 2 years, we will celebrate the centennial of this magnificent newspaper. In 1938, Walter Matt joined the staff of the Wanderer, the leading Catholic conservative newspaper in America. In 1941, he went into the Air Force and then eventually to the Middle East, to Palestine, Egypt, Tunisia, and spent 2 years in Italy. Walter Matt is a very shy, humble person, and when I tried to find out interesting things about him, he was far too humble. Let me say this, he's been an inspiration to many of us, particularly those Catholics, but I believe that he probably has, as subscribers, as many non-Catholics as he has Catholics, because people know they can believe in this magnificent newspaper, The Wanderer. Walter Matt is the positive Catholic social program converted into printer's ink. As a leading Catholic, he is an inspiration to all of us, and I'm very proud to present the editor of The Wanderer, Walter Matt.
Chairman, Reverend Fathers, and ladies and gentlemen. Colonel Bunker mentioned something in his introductory remarks about the moderator perhaps would be able to go on and on with a long talk, an interesting and inspiring talk of her own. Well, I remember some weeks ago when we had our forum, our Wanderer Forum in St. Paul, we also had a moderator. We had this moderator pegged to, well, serve in the capacity as a moderator for our program, one of the panel discussions. Excuse me. Father Ferdinand Falk. Those of you who know Father Ferdinand Falk will know what I mean when I say that he didn't really serve as moderator. He did give us a talk at the outset, which lasted something, I think, in the neighborhood of a full hour. So if Mrs. Frame could have done the same here, I might have enjoyed it equally well as I did Father Falk's, because she was certainly giving me the compliments, so thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, of course. It's my first time, my initial stint with the God and Country Rally here in Boston. Over and above that, I have had the distinct happiness of, for once in my career as a journalist, being able to take my wife and at least 4 of my children along with me on this very auspicious, happy occasion. They're here in the audience now, and we're just trying on this speech for size for the kids. But, well, I think every one of us, as far as speaking for my family is concerned here, has learned a great deal and profited a great deal from this truly magnificent, inspiring convocation or rally, whichever you prefer to call it. I know it's inspired me sufficiently that I walked across the Boston Commons here with my wife and kiddies yesterday when we got in, and visited the old cemetery, and I gave them about a 5-minute discourse, I believe it was, looking at the old tombstones and monuments there in the old cemetery, Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, and the like, giving them about a 5-minute little briefing on some of the basics in our American history. I'm not too sure the way the American educational pattern is going today that they're going to get much more than 5 minutes worth of solid patriotic American history in the next 20 years. Well, I mentioned this before, our Wanderer Forum, the first one, 3 weeks ago when we held our first National Wanderer Forum Conference in St. Paul. Some 500 of us, after 2 days of very serious deliberations, came to the conclusion that what really ails the world of men today is atheism. Speaker after speaker, in assaying the confused and chaotic time in which we live, concluded that the heart of the matter is that men and nations have abandoned God. Worse still, that many have declared an all-out war against him and are determined at all costs to destroy his law and erase his spirit and his truth from the face of the earth. The issue, we said, is spiritual and moral. The enemy today is atheism. The question for each of us to answer is whether we are for God or anti-God. Either men will be ruled by God and his law, or failing that, we shall all be enslaved by despots. So here I am today at this great rally for God and family and country, and I say to myself that such a gathering, dedicated as it is to the defense of God, family, and country, is but a further extension, if I gauge it correctly, of our St. Paul Wanderer Forum Conference, in which we pinpointed the issue as atheism, or the war against God and family and country. And naturally, it makes me extremely happy to think that, contrary to what our opponents keep saying, it is we who are positive in the best sense of that word. It is we, you and I, who are for the highest ideals and values and institutions of human civilization and culture. And it is our opponents, at least those of them who are methodically and purposefully at war with God and who strive to undermine and subvert our Christian American institutions, it is they who are negative, they who are divisive and destructive, they who, if listened to long enough by Americans, will make a shambles of our American history and heritage of one nation in freedom under God. But let me say something more about what I believe we here are all for. Let me underscore anew the all-important fact that in a day and age where state and society have all but been deified or substituted in place of God, it will take full-blooded, honest, courageous, traditional Christian Americans to remind our compatriots and ourselves, that it is the human person, made in the image and likeness of God, the human person, not the crowd, who is the special creation of God and who is destined for eternal life with God. It is he who of necessity takes precedence over the purely earthbound, time-bound, and therefore finite political state and party. It is man as man whom we uphold. We are for government as long as it remains the servant of the people. We are against government only when it attempts to become master and tyrant of the people. Now, our authority for this conviction is God's own word. For it was he, I think one of our speakers this afternoon reminded us of it again, it was he who told us to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. By that statement alone, our divine master built a high wall around the area of government power, limiting it and separating it from the wide domain of our own God-given and therefore inalienable rights and duties as his adopted sons. He did not say that we must render everything to Caesar in order to be happy and secure and prosperous and free. Rather, he said, the truth, his truth, shall make you free. In point of fact, as I understand it, he put us on this earth. Why? Why? To serve the state or society or the race or the class or the organized collectivities and institutions of men? Oh no, he did not. Back in grade school, my penny catechism, the way I learned it before aggiornamento, told me that God created man for one reason and one reason only. I was taught that every man and every woman and every child is put into this world and charged by the Creator with the one great assignment to know God, love God, and serve God in this world in order to be happy with Him forever. Love of God, in other words, even precedes love of neighbor. The commandment to love our neighbor means that we must love the individual person. It does not mean that we must love a non-existent concept called the mass man, the common man, the collectivity of men, the race or the class, or even humanity, which are all intellectual abstractions. And it is this divinely imparted truth, setting forth the proper relations and boundaries between man and God and society, which is the chief ingredient of our American freedom. In other words, and fortunately for all Americans, the unique architects of our great founding, of our great American Republic, recognized this great truth as revealed by God, and they acted accordingly. Our founding fathers understood quite clearly, as that great American constitutionalist Dean Mannion puts it, that man cannot have freedom unless he first recognizes this all-important truth recognized by the founding fathers. And consequently, the founding fathers began their specifications for the building of the United States of America with a clear statement of indisputable fact. In drafting the Declaration of Independence, excuse me, which is after all the first blueprint of our structure of freedom, they began with these deeply profound words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident." They acknowledge that truth must precede freedom. They affirm that some truths are self-evident, therefore absolute, fixed, unchangeable. But what exactly are some of these self-evident truths that made and make Americans free? Number one, all men are created. There is a God. There is a Creator. It is God Almighty who is the number one cornerstone of this republic. All men are created equal. Yes, the founding fathers declared. Equal, that is, in the sight of God, and for that reason equal before the law of the land. But beyond that, all men are unequal in every conceivable way, different from every other person. In this basic sense, there can be no such thing as an average man or a composite man or a common man or a crowd man. For in spite of all the collectivist claptrap, each and every one of us is an individual, a unique personality, and we will stay that way now and forever because God intended it that way. God wanted no nameless, faceless, irresponsible masked man. He wanted an Adam, and he wanted an Eve, and he himself named each accordingly and breathed into each of their progeny a unique, a distinctive, and an eternal soul. Now, as for American freedom, what did our founding fathers say about that? They said all men are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life and liberty. Note that life and liberty are spelled out here as inseparable. In other words, liberty is just as important as life itself. Like the right to life, liberty is a natural right, an inalienable right. If you may not destroy your life, neither may you compromise or sell your liberty, neither for the mirage of peace, prosperity, security, or for anything else in this world. Christ himself admonished us clearly when he said, "What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and suffer the loss of his soul?" Or in other words, if he gains the whole world and sells his soul into slavery in the bargain. In short, my friends, we all have a moral obligation to preserve our life and our liberty. And we exercise this moral responsibility and secure these God-given rights by the institution and maintenance of government. The purpose of government, then, is to preserve our God-given rights, to keep us free, so that we may conscientiously fulfill our role as children of God and heirs of heaven. Government is a necessary mechanism for the protection of human rights and liberties. It is not the source of wealth or prosperity or happiness or freedom or anything else. Government, as all of the great Catholic popes of modern times have stated it over and over again, is intended as an auxiliary arm, a subsidiary agency of we, the people. It has no moral nor legal right ever to usurp the inalienable rights and privileges of the citizenry or to enthrone itself in the place of God. Again and again, the great popes have warned against delegating our personal responsibilities either to state or society when we have no right or need for doing so. Over and over they have told us, in season and out of season, regardless of what some of our modern-day sociologists and theologians say, they've told us explicitly not to burden the government unduly, lest by doing so we lose our God-given status as free men and become swallowed up by an irresponsible collectivity controlled and managed by despots. And the American Catholic bishops have said the same thing in their annual statement of 1960 on the need for personal responsibility. These bishops have told us that the root cause of all our present troubles in the world is the rejection of the sense of personal responsibility. They remind us, these bishops, that unless Americans again learn to accept and to exercise personal moral responsibility and cease relying on the collectivity to think and act for them, there can be little hope of establishing a better world of men. In their own words, a godly society is the work of godly men. Or as a great social reformer of the past century told us, the reform of society presupposes the reform of the individual soul. So, my friends, if the founding fathers were agreed that the secret of our genius and power as a nation and people is simple goodness and honesty and upright living, and if popes and bishops are all agreed, and if all those valiant religious denominations who first set foot on these hallowed shores and whose chief reason for building the earliest American schools was so that their children might learn to read and revere God's word in the sacred scripture, if these great Americans were agreed, I say then, what more do we modern Americans want before we go into action to defend and preserve this precious heritage? When will we begin to see what has happened and is still happening to our beloved country? Have we forgotten so soon that our lofty position as a nation and people and our extraordinary abundance of material possessions are only possible because of this record of goodness and decency? History reveals that whenever moral values and basic principles are sacrificed for utilitarian convenience and comfort and compromise, the result is inevitable self-enslavement and a loss infinitely greater than the loss of our material goods. And that loss is, of course, our freedom. America is great, concluded a brilliant French observer who visited our shores in the last century. America is great because America is good, and if America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. It's as simple as that, my friends. When the character of a nation weakens, when, as in America today, the people constantly look to government as a major cure-all and a miraculous money machine, then the power of government must inevitably mushroom beyond all proportion, while man as man will be divorced, will be dwarfed, will diminish, will decay. Indeed, has not this ill-omened process already begun? Let us ask ourselves, my fellow Americans, do you and do I, in this year of our Lord 1965, honestly still feel ourselves, even as Uncle Sam once felt himself when the French visitor wrote, do we feel ourselves today 10 feet tall, master of all we survey, fearless, free, sure of the future, with a clear conscience, indebted to no man, submissive to no one except to God? Or do we not feel rather a wee bit like Uncle Sam himself, who, as Sidney DeLove describes him in his excellent book, The Quiet Betrayal, has become a rather crotchety man, a man who no longer can stand on his own 2 feet, a man who has all but ceased to move and is ready for the wheelchair that the state is now building for him? Uncle Sam's eyes, observes this brilliant writer, which once possessed the clear vision of an eagle, have become nearsighted. He no longer can see anything far-reaching. His eyes are downcast instead of up. He hears well with one ear, but he is stone deaf in the other. On the left side, there is the growing disease of socialism, communism. And the infection has penetrated so deep and has spread so far that most of his right side is numb. But Uncle Sam seems to have decided that he can live with this disease peaceably. Meanwhile, his voice has become querulous and quavering. It isn't the full-throated, resonant voice he once used when he stood face to face with a haughty king who had vowed to kill him and defied him to do his worst. Today, Uncle Sam speaks to ubiquitous bureaucrats and big and little dictators and breakers of the law with a soft, begging voice, a whining attitude of please, and an insipid, whispering thank you. A cancer of complacency has crept into Uncle Sam's bones, while enterprising Harvard quacks and pseudo-intellectuals everywhere prescribe more and more tranquilizers and sleeping pills for all too frequently indolent and power-drunk mobs. Uncle Sam, says DeLove, is dying from loss of a special type of blood which is rare and vital. It is the type of blood that flowed through the veins of Patrick Henry and Nathan Hale, the kind that pumped the hearts of men like Washington and Lincoln. This type of blood, which is the lifeblood of Uncle Sam and the lifeblood of our freedom, is nevertheless still at hand. It is still to be found if only we, the people, search our hearts and make up our minds to donate unstintingly, each and every one of us, to the great moral and spiritual transfusion that is needed if Uncle Sam and if we are to survive. Let us make no mistake about it, my friends. These are not words. The issue today is spiritual and moral. It is, as the great General Douglas MacArthur stated it, first and foremost theological. The issue today is atheism. The issue is theism versus anti-theism, God versus anti-God. Now, if there are some among us who mistakenly imagine that all we need to do to live in peace and harmony is to rid the world of communism, necessary though that of course is, let them think carefully again. Admittedly, communism is atheism. It is anti-man and anti-God. But communism is not, I repeat, it is not the only ism that is designedly and viciously at war with God and man. Nor is it the only ism that is debasing and dehumanizing and bestializing man. Rather, there is at large today, and right in our very midst in this precious land of ours, an outwardly more refined, more sophisticated, perhaps even more subtle alienism than outright atheism. And this ism was pinpointed by the American Catholic bishops some 15 years ago when they issued a joint pastoral letter on the subject called secularism. Well, what, we might ask, is secularism? Certainly it's not a term invented by Roman Catholics. The dictionary defines it as any view of life or of education based on the premise that religion and religious values, God and future life, may for all practical purposes be ignored or excluded from our everyday thinking and acting. Secularism is a kind of twin brother to atheism. A secularist, however, though conducting himself like an atheist most of the time, usually makes at least a pretense of serving God, even while divorcing God and his law from his own everyday affairs and from all human affairs. For the secularist, God and religion are an outward cloak worn on the Sabbath but hung on a peg for the rest of the week. For the secularist, God and religion are quite properly the business of the church, the sacristy, and the cloister, but they are of no relevance to the affairs of the community, the state, or the nation, or even to the personal lives which each of us must lead. In effect, secularism ignores conscience and removes moral responsibility from every walk and every facet of life. In its idolatrous worship of freedom, without responsibility. It denies any such thing as sin, any offense against God, any violation of law, or in fact any recognition of law that is not man-made. Secularism is a virus, a toxin, infectious and corrosive, threatening the treasured values and standards of our American way of life, for which our forefathers fought and died. Its protagonists, whether in politics, science, or any public profession, tell us that virtue, including love of God and home and country, is really of no concern to civil authority or civil law or international diplomacy or public health or welfare or public education. They pretend that liberty and freedom must be understood without reference to virtuous living or moral responsibility or respect for divinely instituted authority. And some even imply that it is the duty of the law and the civil courts and of all legislation to be morally neutral, tolerant of everything and anything, except, of course, interference with what they call academic freedom, free speech, free press, the alleged right even to subvert our traditional faith in God and family and country. My friends, the effects of such a philosophy cannot but be disastrous. When liberty becomes license, when expediency excludes righteousness, when the conduct of free men precludes moral and virtuous living, then indeed we must begin to fear and tremble for America. Such guideless missiles of licentiousness are far more dangerous and destructive to America than any guided missiles of chemical energy or atomic explosiveness. And yet there is no need to tell you what havoc has already been done to America as a result of this false thinking. Morality is in a tailspin and spiraling steadily downward. Just in case some of you may not have noticed, let me give you a brief rundown. On the national scene today, so-called sex education, for example, comic books, illustrations, movies, television have oriented thousands of young American boys and girls to associate promiscuously, sexually, in a way totally unrelated to the responsibilities of married life. Premarital sexual experience is being openly encouraged as a badge of mature living in our schools and colleges and universities. It is being graphically described in popular paperbacks in any corner candy store and visually portrayed in almost any movie house and family TV screen. Now, we have rallied here in Boston to the defense of God, family, and country, and indeed it is well that we do so. Did you, ladies and gentlemen, know that half of our country's divorces every year involve a teenage marriage? Do you realize there are 15 million divorces in the United States today, 400,000 new divorces each year, with an average of 2 children involved in every such broken marriage? Now multiply these figures over a 10-year period and judge for yourself the state of our family life today. Now add to that picture the 250,000 illegitimate children born each year in this country, mostly to 15 and 19-year-old mothers. Note how government in effect encourages sexual depravity, promiscuity, and greed by indiscriminate aid, so-called, to dependent children. Note how our liberal, social, and government workers are calling louder and louder for ever more working wives and mothers. Already, my friends, more than half of the 25 million working women in the United States today are married women, and about 1/3 of these are young, inexperienced, immature mothers. These are not pleasant facts, but judge, if you will, the problems this creates for husbands and growing children, not to speak of our one nation under God. Look at our growing juvenile crime rates. Don't call it delinquency, it isn't that, it's criminality. Note what is going on in the line of sit-ins, teach-ins, lie-ins, swim-ins on college and university campuses across the length and breadth of our country. It has become fashionable nowadays among our university student bodies to honor Khrushchev or Castro or Kwame Nkrumah by lavish peace parades and so-called nonviolent demonstration, whilst red-blooded American heroes are hanged in effigy, their wives and families harassed by anonymous telephone callers, whilst public reminders of God and His divine Son, such as the cross of Calvary or even the crib of Bethlehem, are strictly verboten by the so-called church-state separators and the misnamed American Civil Liberties Union. I say, my friends, we seem to be dancing on the brink of the abyss, eating and drinking and being merry, even as in the days of Noah before the flood. And yet, these things that I name here, these few incidents or items, bespeaking a tendency, these are but a few randomly chosen symptoms. They are not the cause of our present-day moral anarchy and depravity. The entire picture would take volumes to present and to analyze, but running through it all like a parasite is the philosophy of alien-minded atheism, nourished, aided, and abetted by secularism. The banishing of prayer from public schools by the highest court in the land is but another indication of the direction in which the wind is blowing. It is all part and parcel of a movement to take God out of the hearts of men and society. Most of the violent opposition, for example, to our private and religious schools, which are our last remaining independent schools, after all, most of this opposition comes not from religious non-Catholics, but from the purely this worldly materialists and secularists and atheists, who, estimating properly the religious and moral value of these private and independent schools, nevertheless hate their existence and strive to put them out of business so that the world can go on its merry way of creating a nation of pagans and jungle cats. But these, my friends, are today the molders, if you please, of public opinion, culture, morality in America. These are the ones who, though they have little or no religion, nevertheless make a pretense of it externally, while in their hearts they ignore it, show contempt for the warnings of God or His church, make civil rights or social rights the sole criterion or standard of right and wrong, and are almost hysterical in their conviction that the city of man is humanity's only and ultimate beatitude. How far, how abysmally far we have gone, how perilously we have strayed from the paths of our founding fathers. Is it not strange, my friends, that the same egghead economists, political philosophers, social scientists, who nowadays never cease attacking and denigrating the old hands-off or laissez-faire philosophy of government in the field of economics, are at the same time the stoutest and most virulent champions of a policy, a hands-off policy, in the fields of morality and civilized culture? You and I know that nowadays no producer of material goods, no businessman or so-called capitalist, we heard the the story of Mr. Maddox this afternoon, nobody in that category is free of government regulations and encroachments of the worst kind at every step of the way. And this, some of our liberal sociologists argue, is necessary for the common good. But when it comes to licentiousness, pornography, adultery, irreligion, subversion, even high treason itself, they say to the government, hands off! You have no right to speak or act in such matters. Down with censorship and loyalty oaths to God and country. Down with HUAC committees and all other congressional inquiry committees. You have no business, they say to our government, no business, even to suggest that Americans ought not be atheists, secularists, socialists, communists, deviates, perverts, homosexuals, liars, blasphemers, or anything else, which we, the elite core of liberal-minded secularist brainwashers, are trying to make of Americans. They say to the government, you can and should banish Almighty God from our schools, but you cannot, you must not, you will not banish the Antichrist, for he is our God, and him alone shall we serve. So in effect say the materialists, the secularists, and atheists in our midst. And I say to you, my friends, is it not time to put an end to this double standard in public policy today? We would not let a typhoid carrier near our milk or water supplies. Why then should the purveyors of secularism, irreligion, atheism, filth, subversion, treason have unlimited access to or controlled power over our channels of education and cultural formation? Well, the trouble is that those of us who would raise our voices in defense of right and decency, or who attempt to filter the moral smog from the atmosphere of today's degenerate, amoral society in order to protect the unwary, the innocent, and above all our youth from the vipers who feed on this. It is we who are invariably accused of witch hunting, censorship, right-wing extremism, and all the rest of this garbage. So much so that these things have become dirty words. But censorship there must be, the censorship of conscience fashioned in the spiritual mold of God's law, the censorship of the Ten Commandments, and right-wing extremism there must be, the kind of right-wing extremism that rightly insists with the founding fathers that there is a God. That there is a God, and that his immutable law is the rock on which this great republic stands. But there is this too to be considered. The work of maintaining the religious and moral basis of our country and of Western civilization, of reconstructing wholesome family and communal life, of protecting and preserving our freedoms against the corrosion of secularism and outright atheism, is not the work of priests and ministers alone, but it is rather the work of an aroused and God-fearing citizenry. Now, let me tell you this. As editor of The Wanderer, I receive and read each day many of your personal letters and personal inquiries. I'd hate to begin guessing how many. And I must say that many times I'm completely frustrated and helpless in attempting to answer some of your heartbreaking entreaties with regard, for example, to your personal and family problems. I am moved, for example, by your concern your concern, as evinced in these letters, for the future of America and the future of your sons and daughters. You tell me of some of your sons and daughters who have let slip their faith and the faith of our fathers, who have become enamored with the teachings of Lasky or Marx or Fichte or Hegel rather than God's teachings, who are being led to accept the hedonistic, materialistic philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, who scoff at patriotism or love of country, whose heroes are Hugh Thant and Quacky Sackey, or maybe even Alger Hiss. He's in the news again these days. He's delighted with the way the United Nations is being pulled out of the hole these days again. And your sons and daughters are being enamored, being gradually conditioned to accept these things, these preachments, where your heroes and mine are still Washington and Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson and Douglas MacArthur and Joe McCarthy. You advise me in short of what I already know, namely that the minds and hearts of many of our sons and daughters are gradually being eroded, undermined, betrayed, made foolish, that our children are being educated, or I should say miseducated, in all too many of our once glorious American schools, Harvard, for example, which today, alas, have generally rejected and repudiated God and have substituted for him a veritable blackboard jungle in which switchblades and bicycle chains have all but replaced the Bible, and Karl Marx or some kindred God has been substituted for Jesus Christ. But I need not remind you, my friends, that even in such distressing straits, we cannot expect the churches, either your church or mine, to resolve the difficulties for us. The churches can only preach and teach. They compel no one. They have no special militia to fight our battles for us. It is you and I, the ordinary people, who must learn again from our forebears how, with God's grace, to care for and provide for ourselves and for each other, how to love and respect our neighbor, how to perform the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, how to do right, how to undo wrong, how to organize in concert with other decent citizens to make the world safe for God and family and country. It is you and I, my friends, who have the high duty to study carefully and prayerfully our national and international problems, to reaffirm and reassert those Christian American beliefs and convictions that were once our great glory, and to support only those leaders and their measures that give promise of defending and strengthening and preserving the bulwarks of our American way of life. My fellow Americans, let us be sure in our own minds that there is more at stake today, infinitely more, than mere politics and economics, more than human rights and civil rights, more than the rights of labor and the rights of management. What about God's rights? What about that all but forgotten ingredient called personal moral responsibility? What about the faith of our fathers? America was conceived in faith and in justice and in the worship of God and in the name of the manhood of man. We must return our country to the rule of law, to the Decalogue, to the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and strike down the arbitrary rule of willful and capricious men. I say where communism and the war against God and man are concerned, whether in Cuba, China, Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Santo Domingo, or in our own country, we must determine now not only to resist this monster, but arming ourselves with the sword of the Spirit and the breastplate of salvation. I think it was St. Paul who put it that way. We must determine to conquer, not to coexist with this evil conspiracy. I say, let not the state, nor any combination of organized nations and states, falsely persuade us of the Christian West that in the interests of peaceful coexistence with the atheistic colossus of the communist East, we must be prepared not only to give more and more of the hard-won fruits of our labor in order to prosper that colossus, but worse still, that we must also forfeit our national sovereignty, our sacred birthright of distinctive beliefs, our time-tested notions of good and evil, freedom and slavery, justice and injustice, all of which constitute our precious inheritance as the carriers of the Western tradition and Christian American culture. And in this connection, my friends, permit me to call to your attention the solemn admonitions and warnings of the contemporary scholar Wilmore Kendall, who in his book, The Conservative Affirmation, outlines for us the dangerous internal threat to America and to the Christian West today. Of course, Father Cronin wouldn't agree, I'm sure, to the internal threat. But that threat, as Kendall sees it, is the widespread growing heresy, as he calls it, mistakenly known as Christian pacifism. Dorothy Day in the house. That spurious doctrine, Christian pacifism, as Kendall points out, which is the principled rejection of the use of force in any circumstances, and which even refuses to defend our most sacred heritage against the depredations and lusts of communist barbarism, is in fact utterly alien to the Christian American tradition, since it obviously holds our civilization in such contempt that it prefers not even to fight for it, even if our very survival and the safety of our hearths and homes depends on it. Peace, we must remind ourselves nowadays, peace. When false pacifism threatens to paralyze our individual and collective will to resist evil, and to let violence and injustice run rampant over the face of the earth, peace is something that responsible men and women have always been forced to work and to pray and to fight for. Peace is the fruit of justice, the fruit of orderliness and decency. And God has made it our business, out of love for us and our fellow men, to safeguard and protect these precious things, even if at the cost of our lives, if necessary, in order to keep the blessings of His kind of love and liberty from being extinguished by brutal Berlin walls and barbed wire concentration camps. So-called Christian pacifism, therefore, is not only irresponsible, it is a parasitical doctrine. It is not only heretical, it is barbaric. To the extent that it weakens our will to resist evil, to that extent it increases the enemy's capabilities and his desire to destroy our civilization and culture. Pacifism, in this sense, is on a par with the sin of suicide. And both sins are irresponsible. They are sins of defeat, dishonor, and despair. They are aimed at the structure of existence itself and must end at long last in annihilation. Well, what then are we to do about all this? An interesting quotation. Before it is too late, the American Catholic bishops told us a few years ago, 1960, we must revive in our midst and present to the world the ideals that have been the real source of our national greatness. For America will fulfill its destiny only when we have achieved that spiritual maturity described by Pope Pius XI, or the 12th, I believe it was, as men established in their inviolable integrity as images of God, men proud of their personal dignity and of their wholesome freedom, men solidly attached to their land, their tradition, and their God. This was the statement of the American Catholic bishops a few years ago. Well, my friends, we all know we wouldn't be here if we didn't understand this full well. We all know that our task today will not be easy. But if there are storms in the path of our ship of state, and storms ahead for all of us, and there are, we can, as Paul Harvey reminded us some time ago, we can do one of two things. If they are little storms, we can go around them. If they are big storms, we must head into them. In any case, we shall never be able to run away, and we should know by now that we get hurt whenever we try. We have a good ship, we Americans. She has been through some bad storms before, but she is seaworthy and strong. Her engine is running well, and there is power still in reserve. These are the facts. Now let us work and let us pray. Let us not be afraid, for he, not we, and he, not we, is God, is the master of the sea. Let us, for God's sake, stop the internal quarreling that is beginning to move even in our own midst in the conservative Christian patriotic ranks. Let us stop Let us stop that at all costs. We are all persons, all individuals. Not one of us is expected or should be expected to agree 100% with the next man. Let us stop being cannibals. Let us begin to act as Americans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter Matt. As I said before, he's always an inspiration to all of us.